Hi everyone, and welcome to this video tutorial. In this clip, we're going to be working on Task 3 in the Linux Basics lab. So essentially, we're going to be working on exercise 10-7 in the Linux Fun book. This particular exercise, we're going to be looking at how we display the content of text files, and we have a number of different utilities and tools that we have available for that. So we'll get started in. The first thing, step one, what we need to do is display the first 12 lines of the services file in the etc directory. And when we need to display the first some number of lines of any file, we're always going to use the tail command for that. The head command for that. So I'm just going to simply type in head. If we want to change the number of lines from the default of 10, we simply do dash and then the number of lines. So I'm going to say dash 12, and then in etc services and hit enter, and we can see the first 12 lines, if we count them up, of that particular file. It's really that straightforward. The second step is going to be using the sibling command to head, which is going to be tail. What we want to do is look at the last line of the password file in the etc directory. So here I'm going to use tail. We want one line, do -1, and then etc and password. I'll hit enter, and there is the last line of that particular file. So head and tail commands that we use a lot. Head is very often used to display the beginning of a file so that we can look at the documentation that's at the beginning of the file to see what it does. So when we did the services, you'll see that there's a number of lines there that describe what this file does. You know, what's in it, why do we have it, that type of a thing. Tail is very often used in log files. So we can look at the end of the log file or the last part of the file, anything that's written sequentially, and we want the most recent information. And again, we can look at one line, we can look at many lines, whatever that turns out to be. Now, the next thing we're going to do is use a very versatile utility in step 3 called cat. Cat is short for concatenate. It's used simply to take some input and put it wherever the output happens to be. By default, that's normally going to be the screen, but we're going to do something a bit different here. So the idea in step 3 is to put 5 different lines into a text file. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 would be the values of each one of those lines. So we're going to use cat and then send the output somewhere specific. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say cat, and I'm not going to specify any input explicitly for the cat command. What that means is it's going to read it from standard in, which happens to be the keyboard. Output-wise, I don't want it to go to standard out, which would be the screen. Instead, I want it to a file. So I'm going to do a space, and I'm going to do a greater than sign, which means redirect my output somewhere else. Where am I going to send it? I'm going to send it to a file called count.txt. If I hit enter, you'll see that it's simply sitting there at the keyboard waiting for me to give it some information or some input. So I'm going to say, okay, 1 is the first line, 2 is the second, 3, 4, 5. So there's my input. When I'm done, I can do Control D, and what that does is says end my input. If I want to take a look at the content, I can simply say cat and then the count.txt file, and we can see at the bottom there what the output of the cat command is. So it simply shows us the content of the file. And we can also see from that that the file actually has the content we want it to. So let's do some things with this file. Step number 4, we want to make a copy of count.txt into a file called cnt.txt. So I'm going to say copy count.txt. The target file name is going to be cnt.txt, and we're now done. So we use copy in order to take the input of one file, create a new file from that with the input of the original. Now, why do we do that? We're going to look at a different way of doing that. We could use the cat command. So what we're going to use is the cat command to make a backup of the count.txt file, and we're going to put that into a file called catcnt, catcount.txt. So if I use cat for that, basically what I'm going to do is say I'm going to take cat from count.txt. We saw before, if we just stopped here, it would simply display the output on the screen. but instead what I'm going to do is redirect the output into a file called cat.cnt.txt. When I hit enter, we see that there's no output on the screen, but if I was to display the content of that new file we just created, sure enough, exactly the same content. So, cat can be used to take some sort of input that's going to be text-based and then send the output to another file. Where this can be actually quite useful, let's say that you've got text in two different files, you want to combine the output into a single file. You can say cat input file 1 space input file 2 space redirect greater than to the output, and it'll combine the contents of those two files together. And we'll see that work a little bit later on. Okay. Now, next thing, step 6. What we want to do is display the content of that file that we just created, but we want to reverse it. So instead of going from the first line on the top to the last line, we're going to do last line on top to the first line. The way we do that with instead of cat is tac. So I'm going to say tac, same file, cat.cnt.txt. I'll hit the output, and instead of going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, in this case, we go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. Now again, where is that useful? Sometimes we would have a file, we want to display the output on the screen in reverse, rather than using tail, because we only want a certain number of lines. We can use cat and then we can continuously scroll through it. If we combine that with the less command, we'll talk about that a little bit later on. Or the other thing is that you might have a file that you really do want that file, but everything is reversed in order. By using tac, we can simply say tac the file, redirect the output to another file. We get the exact contents of the file, but in the reverse order. So it can be fairly useful from that perspective. Next command, step 7. We want to look at the Etsy services file, but what we want to do is not simply stop the output after so many lines like we did with the head command. Here we want to be able to basically scroll back and forth on a file. The suggestion is to use the more command. So we would use, say, more, and then /Etsy and /services. We can see that down at the bottom in the corner there, it says more and 0%, which means that we can go further into the file. If I hit enter, I'm just hitting enter a number of times. I'm going one line at a time. If I use space, I go multiple lines at a time. Basically that's the way that more works. We also have a command called less, which is very much like more, except that less allows us to use page up, page down, and the arrow keys on our keyboard. These days you'll find that the majority of people like to use the less command simply because it's more convenient from our keyboards. If I hit Q and get out of this, and I say I want to do less and then the same file again, then I get basically the same output. I can still hit space, enter for one line, I can hit space for multiple lines, but I can also, and I'm just using the up and down arrows now, go one line at a time that way, or I can use page up, page down, and get around that way as well. Just like more, Q, I'm out, and I'm now back to my command prompt. Right. So that's step number 7. Step number 8, one of the things that we have the ability to do is to read user-readable strings or character strings that are in binary files. So I'm going to just show the output from the example here, and we're looking for the file password in user bin. So I'm going to say strings, which is the name of my command. I'm going to say /usr/bin/password. We looked at this file before. I'm going to hit enter, and we see a fair amount of output that comes from this. I'm going to come over here and just scroll back up a little bit. Now, what's important about this? Basically, from what we're looking at, probably not a heck of a lot, but where a program like this comes in really handy is for a software developer, because one of the things they can do is go down through and find out what all the different libraries that are linked to. They can look at any comments that may not have been stripped out, that kind of a thing. So it can be fairly useful from that perspective. Normally, if you're not doing software development, it's not something that we worry about a heck of a lot. So that takes care of step 8. Right. Now, step 9. This is something that can also be quite useful. So one of the things we very often want to do is sort the output from some sort of a command. When we do the ls command, normally everything is sorted by the name of the file. But if we wanted to sort by date, or we wanted to sort by size or something like that. So if I just do a listing of, and I'm going to do a long listing just because it's going to be a little bit easier to see with that. I'm going to do a long listing of Etsy. And I'm going to pipe this into the less command because I want it to stop after one page. And again, this is something fairly common that we do. If you get output that is larger than what's going to fit on one screen and you actually want to see that output, we pipe the result through of the less command, or the more command for that matter, and it will allow us to do a page at a time. Now, the reason I'm doing this, if I hit enter and look at the output, we can see that basically the output is sorted by the name. So we see just time at the top, aliases underneath, that kind of a thing. I'm going to do Q for quit, get out of that. Or we're going to do something a bit different now. Normally, as we just saw, we sort on name, so I'm going to sort by size instead. So I'm going to say long listing. I'm going to say S for size. And then this is going to be on the Etsy directory. And I'm going to pipe this into less, so once again I can go a page at a time. So I'll hit enter. And what we can see is at the top we have a fairly large file. I work my way down and we get smaller. We can also use an R option along with S. And what that does, it goes from small to large. So we can see we start off with what's at 0 and we work our way up. Okay. So that allows us to change by size. We've got options. We can go by date, all the rest of that kind of good thing too. And that will allow us to change sort order when we're going to be doing a listing. Right. Now, next thing, I want to take a look at how we can do a couple different things. It's going to be kind of interesting. One is that I'm going to send some output into a file. We're going to show using the tail command how we can continuously monitor what's going into a file. Now I need 2 different commands prompts for that. So you can probably see that window in the background here. I've got a second one that I've already logged into. This saves us a little bit of time. I'm connecting in as root. Now what I'm going to do is over in this first prompt, or session if you wish, I'm going to send some output into a file called tailing.txt. I'm going to use the echo command for that. So I'm going to say echo, following exactly what's in the book. This is the first line. So this is the first line. And I'm going to send the output to a file called tailing.txt. I'll say enter. Command prompt comes back. So we've now got that line. This is the first line in the tailing.txt file. I'm going to go over here into my second session to look at that, because what I'm going to do, show you something that is really, really good when we're troubleshooting. I'm going to say I want a tail. And if you remember with a tail command, we can specify how many lines we want, or we can basically say I want to do F. And if I use the F option, then what that's going to do is show me the last part of the file. And then as I add more, it's going to automatically keep going. So let me just kind of show you a bit here what this does, and then we'll explain where this can be so useful. So tailing.txt, I'm going to see my one line. This is the first line. Now let me go back over onto my first session. We're going to add on, this is another line into that file. So I'm going to say echo, this is another line. I'm going to do 2 things here that are a bit different. One, instead of doing a greater than for redirect, I'm going to do a double greater than. What that means is append whatever I'm going to do to the end of what's already there rather than replacing. If I use a single greater than, it replaces. Double greater than adds to or appends. And again, I'm going to go into the tailing file. So I've added another line or something to the end of tailing.txt. Now if I come over to my other session, notice that that second line is shown up. So what happens is every single time I add something into tailing.text, it's going to show up when I'm doing this continuous tail operation. Now, where is this really, really good? If I'm testing something and it's not behaving and I'm looking at the output from a log file, which I'm very, very often doing, what I can do is instead of simply going back and tail the log file over and over and over again, what I can do is tail the log file with the F option, and every single time I put in a command to try something, maybe I'm starting a service or I'm testing whether or not a service is going to behave, something like that, then what will happen is I'll get that output from the log immediately, which makes things way faster. When we're finished, all we have to do is do Control-C, and it will stop the tail command. So very, very straightforward from there. Right. Now we'll do a couple of other things. We've got this file called tailing.text. What we're going to do is we're going to take the contents of the etc password file and we're going to add that into the end of tailing.text. So that's what we're going to do in step 12. Once I get rid of this annoying update. So in step 11, what we're going to do is take the output from etc password and put it on the end of tailing.text. So in order to take the output of anything, I can do cat, and this is going to be etc and then password. I'm going to double greater than, so I'm going to append to the end of tailing.text and enter. And that's all I have to do for that. So if we want to take a look at what's in that file, I'm just going to do less and then tailing.text. I'll hit enter. We can see at the very top, this is the first line, this is another line, and then after that, all the contents of the password file. So I'll just quit out of that. And we're set from that perspective. Okay. So that's appending into a file. Now, the next thing we're going to do in step 12, let me check this out. We're going to create a file named tailing.text that contains the contents of tailing.text, okay, preceded by what's in etc password. So in other words, we have to get etc password in there first. Now, we can't do this with a single command. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to take the content of our current tailing file. We're going to set that aside, and we're going to do that by simply renaming the file. So I'm going to say I want to move tailing.text, and based on what we're doing in the book, we're going to call this temp.text. So temp.txt. So I've renamed the file now. If I do a listing of my directory, we can see that we no longer have tailing.text, but we have temp.text. Now, what we're going to do is I need to go password.text, then the content of temp.text. So password.text, the lines I put in, and then password.text again. So we already know that I can say I want a cat /etc/password. And I mentioned before that we can combine files together. So I want to do this. So this is going to precede what's already there. So I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do what I've already got. So I'm going to say temp.txt. So password, then temp, which includes those two lines, and password. And I'm going to redirect all of that out into tailing. Okay, so 2 input files, 1 output, which is going to be redirected to a file. Enter. Now, if we take a look in tailing, okay, I've got the content of my password file. I'm going to scroll down a little bit. You can see the third and fourth lines from the bottom are those 2 lines that we originally put into the tailing.text file, and then the content of the password file over again. So again, easy little trick. If you want to concatenate to the end, that's really easy. Double greater than sign. If you want to put something preceding, there is no input for that, or there's no command for that one specifically. So basically, we take what we've got, we rename it to something else temporary. We take what we want to be preceding, cat that, and then along with whatever we had originally, and then we get a new file. And that is it for this particular exercise. So that's a wrap on the video. Hopefully this was helpful for you, and we'll see you next time.